As I am sure many of you are aware, the creation story contains much more than we read today. There are actually two full creation stories, and we are only getting a glimmer of the second one. But I want to share a little visual of the first, just to lead into where we are today. Almost 100 years ago, James Weldon Johnson wrote a poem called Creation. That's 100 years ago, so the imagery and the language is a little bit different. Language has gotten a little more inclusive over time. But I would like to share with you the end of it that leads into our creation story for today. I'll pick up in the poem after day 5, which is right before humans are created. Johnson imagines God in this moment, and he writes, "He looked on his world with all its living things, and God said, 'I am lonely still.' Then God sat down on the side of a hill where he could think. By a deep, wide river he sat down. With his head and his hands, God thought and thought, till he thought, 'I'll make me a man.' Up from the bed of the river God scooped the clay, and by the bank of the river he kneeled him down. And there the great Almighty, who lit the sun and fixed it in the sky, who flung the stars to the most far corners of the night, who rounded the earth in the middle of his hands, this great God, like a mammy bending over her baby, kneeled down in the dust, toiling over a lump of clay, till he shaped it in his own image. Then into it he blew the breath of life, and man became a living soul." Johnson so beautifully tells of a God who is almighty and transcendent, and yet kneels down on the earth, gently and tenderly forming us and breathing life into us so that God can have a companion. Relationship. It is the foundation of both creation stories. Johnson tells us this, and relationship is why God created and formed the first human. It's also why God created a second. God looked and saw that though creation was good, and though the earth and creatures that God had made were very good, made in God's image, in fact, that it simply wasn't good enough. Understanding the deep longing for relationship and connection, God knew Adam would need more than just animals to hang out with. And so God puts Adam into a deep sleep, and from him takes Zillah, the Hebrew word that means what's so often translated as rib and makes a great visual, but really means something more like side. It's almost as if God pulls apart Adam into two beings, two earthen creatures made in God's likeness, and divided into two, to which Adam exclaims, "Bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh." And that almost makes more sense if you visualize that pulling apart. And so Adam and Eve are created and content. They're content with each other, to have a companion to explore with, to laugh with, content with the beauty of the garden they find themselves in, content with the ease and the safety with which life has been given to them. It is easy. They are content. They have what they need. There is no anxiety about missed alarms or lost jobs or bills to pay. There's no worry about homework or deadlines. There is no thought of death or running out of time or regret. Life is simply life. Like an infant or a toddler, Adam and Eve simply get to exist and enjoy life. They are fed, they can run around naked, and it's, cute, not weird. Bodies are just bodies, and bodily functions are just functions, ways of being in this world. There is no embarrassment, there's no shame, there's no guilt. They simply get to be as they are. They can play when they want to play, they can sleep when they want to sleep, they can eat when they want to eat. There are no demands on them, except God has to go and muck it all up. Wait, is that not the version that you remember? Nope. Well, by muck it up, I mean God does what any good parent does and tries to protect them. The only thing is, as soon as you tell your toddler or your teenager not to do something, that's the first thing they want to do. When my child was little, when he was about 2 or 3 years old and learning language and, repeating every word you say and everything he hears, picking up those words and learning, there were occasionally times where I would say a word that I did not want him to learn. And in those moments, I had to decide what to do next. I had a choice. I could apologize and explain why that was a bad thing to say and that it wasn't appropriate and that I was sorry, and then tell him that he should never say that thing ever again. Or I could just, move on and act like it wasn't said and not draw attention to it. The art of distraction. Hope that even though it's out there in the open, he might not have noticed it and clung on to it and start to repeat it over and over again. Because, that is the nature of kids and humans, to test what we can test, to not let it go, to know what's going to happen. I've worked in enough daycares to know what happens when you draw attention to it. I've watched. And that is the nature of humans. Whenever there is a limit or a boundary set before us or shown to us, the instinct is to push the boundary. Either to see what we can accomplish by pushing our limits, or to see what we can get away with by defying our authority figures. And as it turns out, that is exactly what happens in our story. As soon as the humans are made aware that there is this one thing that is off limits, they are oh so aware of it. Once you know, you know. In fact, when the serpent inquires Eve about it, it's almost like she's trying to talk herself out of it. She says, we are not to eat of that tree. We're not even to touch it, or we're going to die. God didn't actually say they couldn't touch it. It's almost like she's trying to convince herself not to do it. She is talking to herself and to the serpent, and she's trying to do her best to keep her distance. She's already tempted to some degree, so it doesn't take the serpent much to push her over the edge and tempt her a little more. You won't die, the serpent tells her. You'll just know of good and evil. Take note that the Hebrew word that means good and bad, or sometimes translated evil, does in fact mean that, but its connotation is actually something bigger. In the Hebrew language, if you said good and evil, it's like you have good and evil, and it means you will know everything in between the two extents. You will know everything. Like all that is, like good and bad and everything in between, you will know just as God knows. As if the fruit on the forbidden tree wasn't tempting enough because it looks tasty, but then there's all this extra stuff that goes with it. It's intriguing to the curiosity to know what it tastes like, what happens, what might she be missing out on. The possibility of knowing as much as God was a lure that was just too tempting to avoid. I mean, imagine if someone pointed out to you that others know more than you, essentially pointing out that you're ignorant. Wouldn't you want to prove them wrong? I don't know about you, but the thought of looking incompetent is like one of my worst fears. It's enough to motivate me to make some not so great choices. In fact, one of the most common white lies that I have probably lied as a teenager or a young adult, or even occasionally now, is when someone starts talking about something, whether it's like a musician in a band or something in history or like something that just happened on the news that I happen to have missed. And I'll just smile and nod and go along like I know exactly what they're talking about. I read that too. I understand. Because at the end of the day, I'm not trying to deceive them. My gut reaction is to not look incompetent. I don't want to look ignorant. It's because my natural instinct is to hide my ignorance or make up for it by leaving that conversation and then going to read and figure out what it is I missed. So no, I don't exactly condone Eve's behavior here, but I think humans were put in a particularly difficult situation. where all their weaknesses and all their willpower were put to the test. God essentially says, see that one tree over there? It's the only one like it. It's unique. It's special. It has special power. It even has special fruit. You see it? Try to ignore it. It's not for you, O mortal. Jealousy, curiosity, desire, all stirred up. Then the serpent chimes in. See that tree? It holds the key to knowledge. You're pretty ignorant compared to God. God just doesn't want you to be like God. That's the only reason you're told not to eat of that fruit. That's the only reason. Incompetence, insecurity, inferiority, all exposed. How would you not respond? Humans were never perfect, but they didn't really know it until the serpent points it out. Don't you ever wonder why God drew attention to that tree in the first place? Like, if they weren't supposed to eat of it, why wouldn't God put it like out in the woods 500 miles away where they might never stumble upon it? Why would that not be the case? Where it would never be found. Why did God point it out in the first place? Why did it make delicious looking fruit? Better yet, why did God make the tree? Much less the serpent. Was the tree something that just had to exist in order for creation to function like it was supposed to? Or was it some sort of test to see if humans would really listen to God and respect God? Or that a question that arises for so many, is this story just a metaphor for how we evolve over time and develop as humans from naivety to informed to somehow aware and anguished adults? I'll tell you right now, I'm not bold enough to answer that question for you. It's one of those mysteries we'll keep reading on and on. But I will say, no matter how you interpret the story, it raises a lot of questions. And it holds some very bold and unwavering truths about who God is, who we are, and what we are to do in relationship with God, our Creator and companion. How we are to be in this world and what it means to be human. The first creation stories clearly portray God as the divine and creative force. Not only is there this divine imagination that can look into the chaos and vision something, but God has the ability to make something out of it, to pull something into existence. God speaks, and it is. God is the author of life and the writer of the cosmos, the one that makes nothing into something, chaos into order. But why? It's almost as if inherent to God's being is a love of beauty and a desire for connection. It's almost as if the very essence of who God is this plural relational being. The text actually says we'll make them in our image, our Trinity God. It's almost as if God begins creating, and out of the deep desire for connection, and God does not stop until every creature has a suitable companion to connect to. More than just apples and bread, shelter and clothing, God knows that authentic, intimate relationship and connection. Someone to share life with, to laugh with, to make it through the pain with, to embrace with, to be there in the ups and downs is as much of a need as anything else. The story clearly lays out what God initially intended for us to be as humans. However, the original Hebrew has been interpreted in many ways over time. The King James and the NRSV have interpreted them in different ways. The story after creation and what happens and the consequences that unfold, they say different things. But the one that I think might actually be the most accurate is the NIV in this case. which says something that we are told that in King James that humans are to till and keep the garden. And this might be true, but the NIV is more accurate, and it says humans are to work for, to serve, and care for the garden. Tilling and keeping is a good interpretation and was very relevant at the time of the King James translation, which is a very agricultural society. And when they would relate to those terms, however, the original Hebrew word till is really closer to the word serve. So if you've ever gardened or farmed, you can probably attest to the fact that it is a labor of love. If you're growing crops, if you're growing flowers, it's a labor of love. It's not just tilling the dirt and controlling the weeds and the crops, but it's a conscious awareness of the plants, the needs. It's a give and take, a nurturing that allows things to thrive and grow. You have to recognize when they need water, when they've had too much. You have to recognize what is needed. You are essentially a servant of the garden. You act as a servant of the soil, as Holbert puts it, partnering together in creation. So yes, the original human, Adam, is to partner with the soil in Hebrew, and that word is to become co-creators alongside God. The story offers a candid portrayal of who we are as humans, all of our imperfections. It portrays the story of human development as we go from these fearless babes where nothing can go wrong, where we're fed and clothed and having all that we need and not a care in the world, into this point of adolescence, seeking our own independence and making risky decisions, aware that we're pushing the limits and testing our luck, but unaware of just how risky it is until it's too late. Adults whose eyes have been opened, who have full knowledge of good and evil. We develop over time people that must wrestle with this knowledge and make complicated choices. They're not always easy. People that must know how to labor in love. People who must know how to labor in pain, as the scripture tells us occasionally. Worry and hide, experience regret and shame. People who try to hide and cover up failings and insecurities. Imperfect people. This story is pretty honest about it. We're imperfect people who tend to self-preserve at any cost, occasionally unleashing our fears and frustrations needlessly on one another. And we do it all with this fear of failure. We do it all preserving ourselves, covering things up, hiding our weaknesses, hiding our incompetence, our ignorance. We do it all with this fear of failure, of being caught by some almighty being who sadly really wants nothing more than to connect with and care for us. Ironic, isn't it? This story also points out another truth. People get to make choices. From good to bad and everything in between. People have free will to do so. But why? Why would a good and almighty God permit choices and allow things to happen? Why is this how God chose to make the world? It's another question I'm not going to dare to definitively answer for you, but I have my guesses. I suspect, knowing this story and God's need for creation and connection and relationship, it's because relationship is inherent to who God is. And true relationship is about more than obedience and control, tilling and keeping. It's a labor of love. It's give and take. It's about conscious awareness of what the other's needs are and a faithful response. It's about respect and compassion. It allows the other space to be and explore. Because even though God is all powerful, real love is not coerced by power. And though God is in control, God is not controlling. And so God permits us the ability to make choices. And I have to imagine, like Eve grabbing hold of that fruit off the forbidden tree, sometimes God hates the decisions we make. But true, loving relationship is about offering all that we are, all that we have to give, in hopes that the other might respond in the same way. Yes, this ancient story about the creation of the world and all of humanity reflects a lot about who we are and who God is. Humans sought to be like God, and they got what they wanted: knowledge and awareness, but also feelings of shame and guilt, and a deeper understanding as well. They began to know everything. They began to understand just what real love and real joy truly are. There's a rabbi, Harold Kushner, who has written about the woes of this creation story and its reality for us. He relates it to parenthood and all the ways that we might dream of the ideals and the perfection for the baby in the womb, not yet knowing who they will be. We work to live into our hopes and dreams. And then, no matter how wonderfully we parent, it's still imperfect, and so are our kids. We eventually realize that nothing we create is perfect, and that letting our child become who they are might mean letting go of some of our original dreams. It might be the most loving thing we can do. For we are all imperfect. We always have been, and we always will be. We have the ability to make choices, but we also have the ability to co-create with God. For we were made in the image of God. And that is good. That is very good indeed.